Whereas the current government has failed to adequately assess or address these issues, keadilan will pursue the policies critical to reasserting Malaysia's quality of life, economic strength, and competitiveness in the global economy. We are in fact recommending a better understanding of the successes of Taiwan, Korea, and Ireland, and integrating the best practices of these economies with the enormous potential of Malaysia's natural and human resources, as well as the positive aspects of Malaysia's past development plans. When our model is implemented, we believe the gap between Malaysia and other developed countries in terms of economic performance and living standards must be narrowed instead of growing as it has under the current government. Our policies will spur a rapidly growing economy that can effectively compete at the regional and global level, as well as open up numerous opportunities for all Malaysians and for all scales of business at the individual and sector level. Keadilan's educational and human development reforms will bring about an improved educational system and knowledge-based economy and enable Malaysia's domestic businesses to meet the global challenge with a locally sourced and highly skilled labor force. Our policy changes target attracting increased foreign and domestic investment and improving labor skills and productivity in the private and public sectors. The key features of our model include faster pace of economic liberalization, extensive investment in quality education, higher rate of investment in public-oriented infrastructure, integration with more developed ASEAN and East Asian countries, stronger role for the private sector, merit and need-driven policies with a stronger safety net for the poor, higher standards of governance and accountability. Now, our response to Barisan Nasional's 2009 national budget. BN government's misrepresentation of the current situation. Although described in the mainstream BN control government papers as a budget with something for everyone, much of it is illusory. This economic plan will clearly not produce the concrete results that BN has been promising Malaysians. It follows the trend of previous years, which resulted in gross examples of mismanagement, inefficiency, and missed opportunities to take Malaysia and its people forward. We believe that many citizens are aware that the reality of Malaysian achievement compared with other countries, particularly in the context of the country's enormous potential in human and natural resources, is far from the BN government's rosy rhetoric. The realities of the current BN government's mismanagement has been worsening socioeconomic disparities, rising income inequalities, spiraling cost of living, growing urban and rural poverty undetected or underestimated by the government's unrealistic poverty line, endemic corruption, falling competitiveness and sluggish growth, rising cost of doing business. The above shortcomings do not touch on the key non-economic factors of quality of life, namely civil liberties, judicial independence, media freedom, race relations, religious tolerance, national unity, crime, and security. While not addressed in this brief, these are all key issues whose resolution the current government has either mismanaged or manipulated for the sake of certain individuals to secure narrow interests against that of the greater public good. Now, deteriorating public finances and economic sluggishness. We have outlined several indicators which raise grave concerns about financial and economic mismanagement. 1. Operational expenditure in 2009 national budget has increased to 154.2 billion from 128.8 billion in 2008, an alarming increase of almost 20%. This is close to a 100% increase, or doubling from the 80.5 billion ringgit in operating expenditure in 2004 when Abdullah Badawi first became Prime Minister. Of even greater concern is that the current operating budget is nearly a 200% increase from that in 2000. 2. Malaysia is suffering from sluggish domestic investment despite not being short of domestic capital. Private fixed capital formation averaged less than half of total fixed capital formation. Since the current government first entered office, Malaysian investment abroad, outward FDI, has risen dramatically from less than 50% of inward FDI in 2004 to approximately equal to inward FDI in 2006, to now actually exceeding inward foreign investment. This is entirely uncharacteristic of any growing economy in the world and raises grave concern about the policies driving Malaysian capital flight. 3. The economy grew 6.3% in the 3 months ended June from a year earlier, down from a 7.1% gain in the first quarter. Economic growth is forecast to ease to 5.7% this year and 5.4% in 2009, the weakest pace since 2005. The figure suggests potentially a growth of just 4% for the fourth quarter of 2008. The government's proposed budget will be unable to do the heavy lifting required of it in 2009. Now, the government's irresponsible reliance on a global upturn in 2009 would directly impact Malaysia's economy and growth. 4. Inflation was at a 27-year high of 7.7% in June. As a result of the government's mismanagement of the petrol subsidy issue. There are signs that it is worsening. July's inflation rate gives a figure of 8.5% increase in the CPI, with food rising 11.2%, transport 22.7%, consumer non-durables 15.4%. The fiscal deficit has risen from 3.2% in 2007 to 4.8% of GDP this year. From my understanding of the economy, anything exceeding 4% is considered to be risky. The KL Composite Index is down from 1.374 to 1.163 year to year. Market capitalization lost over 200 billion ringgit, or almost 1/5 of its value within 1 year. Now, the ringgit's value has weakened against the major currencies. Against the US, we are an exception. Most currencies strengthen. We have the ringgit recently completed its biggest monthly loss since the end of a peg against the dollar in 2005.